J.P. Morgan is the largest bank in the United States, with assets of nearly $4 trillion, 5,000 branches, and 250,000 employees. However, longtime CEO Jamie Dimon has never been satisfied with J.P. Morgan's size and has instead sought out new ways to expand the bank. Welcome back here at Financial Fortune. We would like to give you information about J.P. Morgan's swindled issue. Just keep on watching. The number of fintech firms has exploded in recent years, and they have begun to steal customers and revenue from traditional banks. Younger generations prefer to handle all of their financial matters from the convenience of their mobile devices, rather than visiting a regular bank branch. Against the backdrop of rising competition from fintech startups, Dimon understood that he needed to pivot his bank to better serve the needs of millennials and Gen Zers. For this reason, he has been on something of an acquisitions binge over the past 3 years, purchasing various small fintech companies from around the globe. They shelled out $175 million in 2021 to acquire a startup company, named withfrank.org. After promising to be more aggressive in his takeover efforts last year, Jamie Dimon has delivered. This time J.P. Morgan is expanding its financial services by acquiring a startup in the education sector.
Jamie Dimon declared last year he planned to get more aggressive in seeking takeovers, and he's certainly made good on that promise with J.P. Morgan buying another financial startup. This time it's college financial planning platform, Frank.
J.P. Morgan announced it would be acquiring the Irish fintech firm Global Shares, a software provider for managing employer share plans. The move adds to a buying spree of acquisitions the big bank has been making over the course of the past year. And for this and more, we're bringing into the stream Ben Hess, J.P. Morgan Asset and Wealth Management Chief Operating Officer. Ben, thanks for joining us. Tell us, what was the opportunity seen in Global Shares, and why was now the right time to make this move?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me, Emily. So at our Investor Day in 2020, our CEO of Asset and Wealth Management, Mary Erdos, got in front of our shareholders and talked about, in addition to the strategies for accelerating our organic growth, talked about potentially doing inorganic growth as well. And we were really deliberate with that M&A message. We said it to our shareholders before that we were considering M&A. And one of the different categories that we said we would consider was adjacent capabilities. And so an adjacent capability is share plan administration, which is the core business of Global Shares. And so we had looked at probably 24 or so players in the space over the past 2 years. We really like the technology, we like the team, we like the culture. At Global Shares, we spent a lot of time with their CEO, Tim Houston, and his team in Ireland, in London, over hundreds of Zoom calls and phone calls. And the deal just came together, and it's super exciting for all of us.
Frank was founded by the visionary 28-year-old Charlie Javis, who hoped to revolutionize the higher education financial aid industry by making it possible for students to fill out previously complex paperwork online in a matter of minutes. J.P. Morgan saw an opportunity to expand its user base and paid $175 million to acquire Frank. The company then promoted Charlie Javis to the position of Managing Director of Student Solutions. When we looked back a year later, everything had altered dramatically. Charlie Javis was accused of masterminding a scheme to defraud J.P. Morgan out of money from the 4 million students Frank claimed to have helped. They say that over 90% of them were made up by Charlie Javis. The bank has formally accused Javis of fraud and is demanding a full refund of the purchase price of $175 million. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. The rise of Frank. It's safe to say that Charlie Javis had a privileged upbringing. Her father was a New York City financier, and she went to a prestigious private high school where tuition was $40,000. Her next stop was the University of Pennsylvania's illustrious Wharton School of Business. Soon after she received her degree, she started her own online university called Frank University, which was funded by venture capital. Because of the high cost of an American education, millions of students must rely on financial aid, such as student loans and grants, to cover their educational expenses. The free application for federal student aid, FAFSA, is one of the most effective ways to get financial aid, as it helps the government determine whether or not you qualify for their various student aid programs and how much you can receive. Students are now required to provide extensive personal information and fill out numerous government-mandated forms, making what was once a straightforward process into one that is more burdensome than ever. To many students, the time and effort required to complete the FAFSA form is too great a barrier to entry. To address this issue, Javis developed with Frank.org, a user-friendly online platform that makes the FAFSA application process much more streamlined for students. Frank's prominence in the public eye skyrocketed in the first few years of Javis' existence. She became so well known that Bumble.com, a popular online dating service, published a glowing profile of her. The problem was that while she was seen as a future visionary, some even compared her to a female Steve Jobs. Frank did not collect payment for helping students with their FAFSA applications. It didn't matter how big Frank got, the company would always operate at a loss. Since she had no other means of commercializing her invention, Javis had to sell it to a strategic acquirer. Why, then, would a buyer be interested in a business that shows no signs of turning a profit? The fraud. Defendant Javis is accused of a massive and complex fraud by plaintiff J.P. Morgan. It has been claimed that rather than having 4.2 million users, Frank actually only had 290,000. Keep in mind that Frank was losing money and not making any. Javis needed to sell her company for cash, but a major financial institution like J.P. Morgan wasn't interested because it had fewer than 300,000 active users. In order to fool the system, she made up 4 million fictitious members. But how could something like this happen? How could J.P. Morgan, one of the largest investment banks in the world, have been duped into purchasing a website with 90 fictitious users? The due diligence process involved J.P. Morgan requesting a list of names, phone numbers, physical addresses, and email addresses from Javis. The information requested will help J.P. Morgan confirm the users' identities. In the beginning, Javis claimed that she could not provide the user list because doing so would violate the student's right to privacy. However, this was just a delay tactic, as the 4 million person student list did not yet exist. And all the while she was making excuses about her privacy, Javis was scrambling to cover up her deception. According to rumors, she paid a computer science professor $18,000 to make a fake database of 4.2 million user profiles. As regards each individual profile, they required a fictitious identity complete with phony contact info. We had no trouble exchanging names and numbers. Making 1 million John Smiths and Jane Does is child's play for a computer scientist. We can also easily find a phone number. You can easily generate a list of random numbers using an area code lookup table. Creating a plausible address for the made-up student is trickier because you have to make sure that the made-up street name actually exists in the made-up state. In addition, their email addresses were a mystery. It would be easy to spot the fake email addresses if they were generated at random using numbers, letters, or even words. Javis and the other computer scientists eventually gave up. They didn't just give out made-up email and mailing addresses, but unique IDs as well. To represent actual information, unique IDs are generated at random. It was claimed, once again, that this was done to protect the student's privacy. J.P. Morgan didn't have access to the email addresses or physical addresses, but they did have the names and phone numbers of the 4.2 million people. This convinced them that the users were legit, and they completed the $175 million acquisition. The contract was finalized in the summer of 2021, and Javis received her enormous payout at that time. The fraud unravels. However, she had not yet reached safety. She could no longer use the separate identifiers as a shield because J.P. Morgan now owned Frank. In order to run their marketing campaigns, the bank required access to these email addresses, which was the primary motivation for the acquisition. The buying and selling of private information, including email addresses, has emerged as a multi-billion-dollar market. Javis and her colleagues negotiated a price of over $100,000 with data brokers ASL Marketing and Inform for a list of 4.2 million email addresses. Javis bolstered her phony clientele list with emails and other information purchased from data brokers. The marketing team at J.P. Morgan emailed random email addresses, assuming they belonged to Frank users. If you received an email from Chase Bank congratulating you on your successful financial aid application to Southeastern Louisiana University, but you had never applied for student aid and had never heard of Southeastern Louisiana University, you might suspect the email is a scam. Your likelihood of becoming a Chase customer as a direct result of reading this email is practically nil. In addition, you now associate the Chase name with this fraudulent email. JP Morgan's reputation was in jeopardy, so they promptly shut down the website and wrote off the $175 million investment. Javis' biggest blunder was using her official Frank email account to plot the alleged fraud after JP Morgan bought the company. Now that JP Morgan owned the Frank email accounts, the company could access any and all emails from that time period. After the marketing campaign failed miserably, they looked into Javis' emails and found incriminating evidence, including her communications with the computer science professor. Javis is entitled to a fair trial, and these are only allegations. But if JP Morgan really does have all the emails they claim to have, her defense will be severely compromised. For Javis, the goal was to expand access to federal funding for higher education. Both were probably confident in the long-term success of their businesses, but they had to exaggerate a bit in the short term in order to attract investors. Because of the acquisition, Javis is now employed by JP Morgan, suggesting that she join the bank because she believed she could eventually coax Frank into success. She probably hoped that by creating a phony email list, she could gain some breathing room. Frank could be expanded with the help of JP Morgan's resources, allowing her to reach her stated goal of 4 million users. And perhaps things would have been okay in the end. However, since the fraud has been uncovered, it's possible that we'll never know for sure. That's going to be the final statement for this clip. What do you make of the allegations of fraud against Charlie Javis? Share your thoughts with us in the space provided below. Your continued support is greatly appreciated. Until the next time, enjoy the show. Fortune and Finance, signing off.